Let's get right into it. Number 9. Banking for drug cartels. Picture yourself as a drug cartel leader sitting on billions in cash. Where would you stash all that money? Well, if you were operating between 2006 and 2010, you could have simply strolled into HSBC. Not some sketchy underground operation, but one of the world's largest and most prestigious banks. HSBC wasn't just taking cartel money. They were basically rolling out the red carpet for it. They even designed special bank windows in Mexico that were exactly the right size for cartels to slide in boxes of cash. These boxes were specifically sized to fit the standard dimensions that cartels use to package their drug money. It's like they were running a drive-through for laundering drug money. The bank moved at least $881 million in drug money for cartels, like the Sinaloa cartel. That's almost $1 billion. HSBC marked Mexico as a low-risk country for money laundering. That's like marking a volcano as a low risk for eruptions while it's actively spewing lava. When they finally got caught, HSBC had to pay a fine of $1.9 billion. For HSBC, that was about 5 weeks of profit. It's like getting caught robbing a bank and having to pay a parking ticket. Not a single HSBC executive went to jail. Meanwhile, if you get caught with a small amount of drugs, you might face years in prison. But help launder billions in drug money, and you just pay a fine that you'll make back in a month. After all this came out, HSBC actually ran ads about how trustworthy they were. That's like a burglar leaving a 5-star Yelp review for the house they just robbed. Number 8. The false testimony that sold a war. Picture yourself watching TV in 1990 when a 15-year-old girl appears on screen crying as she tells Congress about Iraqi soldiers. She says they're storming into hospitals in Kuwait, taking babies out of incubators, and leaving them to die on the cold floor. Your blood boils. You want justice. You support going to war. You just got played by a PR firm. That crying teenager was actually the daughter of Kuwait's ambassador to the United States. Those dead babies never happened. The whole thing was made up. This was all orchestrated by a PR firm called Hill and Knowlton, who were paid $10.7 million by Kuwait to convince Americans to go to war. They knew exactly what they were doing. A crying teenage girl talking about dead babies is like the nuclear bomb of emotional manipulation. The story was repeated over and over. President Bush mentioned it in speeches. The media couldn't get enough of it. It worked so well that this fake testimony was cited by senators as a reason to support the Gulf War. The PR firm also ran focus groups to figure out what would make Americans most likely to support a war. Turns out nothing gets people fired up like dead babies. The truth didn't come out until after the war was over. By then, it didn't matter. The PR firm had already cashed their check. Kuwait got their war, and America had a new playbook for selling future conflicts. Number 7. AT&T's mass surveillance program. Picture your phone as a diary that records everything you do, who you call, when you call them, how long you talk. It's all there. Now, imagine AT&T has been collecting and reading these diaries since 1987. That's exactly what they've been doing with something called the Hemisphere Project. Think of it like having a nosy neighbor who's been watching your house for decades. But instead of just watching one house, they're watching every house in the neighborhood. And by neighborhood, I mean the entire country. We're talking about billions of phone records every day. That's more data than all the books in the Library of Congress combined. AT&T isn't just collecting this data for fun. They're selling it to law enforcement agencies. Some agencies pay up to $1 million a year for access. It's like AT&T is running a spy shop, and the government is their best customer. Now, you might think they need a warrant for this. Nope. All they need is something called an administrative subpoena. That's basically like a permission slip that they write themselves. And they're not allowed to tell anyone they're using it. If they catch someone using this data in court, they have to pretend they got the information some other way. It's like catching your sibling stealing cookies, but telling your mom you just had a feeling. The government calls this parallel construction. I call it lying with extra steps. Remember when everyone freaked out about the NSA's PRISM program? Hemisphere makes PRISM look like amateur hour. PRISM was collecting emails and internet data. Hemisphere has been tracking nearly every phone call that passes through AT&T's network since the 1980s. And unlike PRISM, which eventually got shut down after public outrage, Hemisphere is still going strong. Number 6. The toxic truth about non-stick pans. Back in the 1960s, DuPont, the company making Teflon, uncovered something pretty terrifying about their miracle product. The chemical they were using to make it, called C8, was doing some wild things in their lab tests. Give a rat a tiny bit of this stuff, and its liver would blow up like a balloon. But instead of warning people, DuPont decided to play the nothing to see here card. They kept quiet even when their own studies showed that dogs were literally dying after a single dose of this chemical. In 1980, they noticed something really disturbing. Pregnant workers in their Teflon plants were having babies with birth defects. They didn't stop production. They didn't warn their workers. Instead, they just quietly moved all the women workers to different departments. This stuff was so persistent that scientists started calling it the forever chemical. Once it gets into your body, it stays there forever. By the 2000s, this chemical was found in the blood of 99% of Americans. It was in the water, in the soil, in animals, even in breast milk. Internal documents showed DuPont knew about all of this for decades. When they finally got caught in 2005, DuPont had to pay a $16.5 million fine. They made billions selling Teflon products. The chemical is now banned in the US, but those forever chemicals are still out there. They're in the water, in the soil, and probably in your blood right now. Number 5. When the government poisoned its own people. The year's 1926, and prohibition is in full swing, but Americans aren't exactly following the rules. Instead of giving up booze, people are getting creative. They're turning to industrial alcohol, the stuff meant for things like cleaning and manufacturing. The government's response was to start adding deadly poisons to industrial alcohol, straight-up lethal chemicals like methanol, which can make you go blind before killing you. The government knew exactly what would happen. They had scientists calculate the perfect poison cocktail that would kill or disable anyone who drank it. During Christmas of 1926 alone, 23 people in New York City died from this poisoned alcohol. People were literally dropping dead at Christmas parties. New York's medical examiner said, "The government knows it is going to kill people, yet it plans to continue and even double its poison." By the time Prohibition ended, an estimated 10,000 people had died from drinking this government-poisoned alcohol. When people started dying, the government didn't stop. They doubled down. Their response was basically, well, they shouldn't have been drinking illegal alcohol. It's like setting up a bear trap in your fridge and then blaming people for trying to steal your leftovers. Some bootleggers hired chemists to try to unpoison the alcohol. It was like a deadly game of chemical cat and mouse. The government would add new poisons and the bootleggers would try to filter them out. And when they got it wrong, regular people looking for a drink paid the price. Number 4. The baby. Body-Snatching program. Picture yourself living in the 1950s. Your baby passes away, and you arrange a funeral to say goodbye. But what you don't know is that someone's about to steal parts of your baby's body, and the thief is the United States government. This was Project Sunshine, and it's one of the darkest government programs ever exposed. The government needed to study how nuclear fallout affects human bodies. But they didn't want to just study adults. They wanted to study babies. Specifically, they wanted baby bones. They hired people to literally steal body parts from dead babies. The government didn't just do this in America. They had people stealing baby parts in Europe, Australia, and South America too. In total, they stole parts from over 1,500 babies, and not a single parent knew about it. They targeted babies because babies absorb radiation differently than adults. Their growing bones soak up radioactive materials like a sponge. The scientists were especially interested in something called strontium-90. It's a radioactive material that gets into your bones and stays there. The project was so secret that even some scientists receiving the samples didn't know their origin. They just received packages with bones in them. No names, no paperwork, nothing. Just boxes of stolen baby parts showing up at their labs. This went on for years before anyone found out. The government only admitted to it in the 1990s. Number 3. Corporate murder by asbestos. Picture yourself working at John's Manville in the 1930s. You notice your coworkers are getting sick. Some are coughing up blood. Others can barely breathe. But when you bring this up to management, they just shrug it off. What you don't know is that your bosses have known for years that the white dust you're breathing is killing you. They've got the medical reports locked away in their desk drawers. They've read the studies showing how asbestos fibers tear up your lungs like tiny pieces of glass. In 1949, AT&T, Ray Bestos' Manhattan executive, wrote in a memo that the less said about asbestos, the better off we are. These companies had their own doctors examining workers. When these doctors found early signs of asbestosis in workers' lungs, they didn't tell the workers. By the 1960s, the evidence was overwhelming. One Bendix Corporation executive wrote that if you've enjoyed a good life while working with asbestos products, why not die from it? That's an actual quote from an actual memo. These weren't just negligent business decisions. This was corporate murder planned and executed over decades. They knew their workers would die. They calculated the cost of those deaths, and they decided the profits were worth it. When the truth finally came out, John's Manville filed for bankruptcy to avoid paying victims. They had $2.2 billion in assets at the time. But before filing for bankruptcy, they set up a trust fund, not for their dying workers. This trust fund was to protect their executives' retirement benefits. Number 2. The gas that made everyone dumber. Back in the 1920s, General Motors had a problem. Their cars were making weird knocking sounds when the engine ran. They came up with a solution. Add tetraethyl lead to gasoline. It worked great. The engines ran smooth as butter. There was just one tiny problem. Lead is super toxic, and the companies knew this from day one. When they first started making this leaded gas, workers in their factories started going crazy. Like literally crazy. They called it the loony gas building because workers would start hallucinating, having violent outbursts, and then just drop dead. In one factory, 15 workers died, and 300 others got severely sick. But instead of stopping production, the companies just said these workers had poor hygiene or were partying too hard. Meanwhile, their own scientists were writing reports saying, this stuff is basically poison. But those reports got buried faster than the workers who died, making the stuff. The companies even hired their own scientists to say lead was totally safe. One guy, Robert Kehoe, spent 50 years saying lead was natural and healthy. This went on for decades. It wasn't until the 1970s that the truth finally came out. A scientist named Claire Patterson proved that lead levels in the environment had skyrocketed since they started using leaded gas. He showed that before leaded gas, humans had 625 times less lead in their bodies. Think about that. These companies literally changed the chemical composition of the human race for profit. The EPA finally banned leaded gas in 1996, but by then, the damage was done. Studies show that anyone born between 1950 and 1980 probably lost about 6 to 7 IQ points thanks to lead exposure. That's an entire generation made slightly dumber because some executives wanted bigger bonuses. The same companies that fought to keep lead in gasoline are still around today. Number 1. Big Pharma's deadly addiction scheme picture. Yourself running a company that makes painkillers. You know your drug is super addictive, but instead of warning people, you tell doctors it's totally safe. That's exactly what Purdue Pharma did with OxyContin. They didn't just lie about how addictive it was. They told doctors that less than 1% of patients would get addicted. Meanwhile, their own research showed that number was way, way higher. They created this thing called savings cards for new patients. These cards gave people their first prescription for almost free. It's like a drug dealer saying the first hit's free. They even had a secret program called Region Zero that tracked doctors who prescribed tons of OxyContin. Instead of reporting these suspicious doctors, they gave them bonuses. It's like catching someone robbing your store and giving them a gift card. They also told doctors that OxyContin was abuse-proof. That's like saying, your car is crash-proof while watching it explode. The company knew people were crushing and snorting the pills, but they kept pushing this lie for years. Doctors started noticing their patients getting addicted. Purdue had an answer for that. They invented something called pseudo-addiction. They said if a patient seems addicted, they're probably just in pain and need more OxyContin. That's like telling someone with alcohol poisoning to drink more beer. The company made $35 billion doing this. The family that owned Purdue took most of that money and moved it offshore. When they finally got busted, they declared bankruptcy, but the Sacklers had already pocketed billions. They basically robbed a bank and said, "Oops, I'm broke," while sitting on a yacht made of gold. This conspiracy killed more Americans than the Vietnam War, and it's still killing people today. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.